If you like what you're seeing and hearing, please consider subscribing to the podcast. You can go to either Apple iTunes, the Google Play Store, Spotify, or Amazon Music in the podcast section. It'll hit Monday morning or Sunday afternoon, depending on when it posts. And the video will hit on YouTube and Spotify Monday. Spotify will hit Monday evening, and YouTube it'll hit Monday morning, 7 a.m., just like it does for the audio services. So please go to those places and consider subscribing or listening to the show. You can also write to me at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com if you want to write me a letter. Let me know what you think of the show, things like that. Or you can also find me on Twitter at JustLittleJoe. So go to those places and please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks. And with that, we'll get on to the episode. Hello, my name is Joseph Carlson, and this is The Grief of Spider-Man. Hey, this is the episode. We're going to talk about Marvel Spider-Man 2. It came out, according to my math and what I could research, on October 17th, 2020. Hopefully that's right. Hopefully it's not October 20th. Anyway, I want to talk about the game, how it deals with grief, because that's what this, podcast is. But before I get into everything, I know I just gave you a thing to like and subscribe, but please, it means a lot. Like, subscribe, talk to your friends, share, all that kind of stuff. What else? No big announcements. If you see that I'm in a different location, it's because I'm setting up for something else, and I didn't want to move my setup somewhere else and set up somewhere else, whatever. Anyway, so let's talk about Spider-Man 2. I talked about the original Marvel Spider-Man, and I talked about Miles Morales, and how each of these characters dealt with grief in their own way. Of course, Peter Parker in Marvel's Spider-Man 2018, his parents had died. He lived with Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben passed away, obviously, before the game, so he's living with Aunt May. Spoilers. Again, this is going to be full spoilers for Marvel's 2018 Marvel Spider-Man. I wrote down Miles Morales came out in 2018. 2020. Is when Miles Morales came out. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, I think, came out in 2020. Full spoilers for all these games, and obviously I'm going to spoil Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Everybody dealt with grief in their own way, starting with, the end. The middle of Marvel Spider-Man 2018, when Jefferson Davis, Miles' father, passes away at an event, a parade, by Mr. Lee, Mr. Negative, in the game, the supervillain, Martin Lee. And so Miles was obviously grappling with that. Obviously very sad. You deal with this throughout the game. In the end of the game, it's not as much because you're playing as Peter Parker. But then in the end of Marvel's Spider-Man, the original one in 2018, that the first incident is obviously in the middle of the game. Miles is introduced. His father, Jefferson Davis, passes away at the rally. There was an attack by Mr. Negative. Then at the end of the first game, obviously Peter Parker or Aunt May dies. So that is terrible. By Dragon's Breath, I think is what, if I remember right. That was one thing I didn't look up the credits. I mean, I played the game and everything. But, so they're obviously dealing with the grief of loved ones. Then Miles Morales comes out in 2020. We find out that Miles' friend, Finn, becomes the Tinker. And, that is weird. I talked about that game. I didn't really like the redemption arc of that game. I did understand Finn's motivations. I mean, looking back, I understand Finn's motivations for turning against Roxxon because, of course, it made her uncle, who I actually didn't write his name down, made him sick, right? What they were doing, the radiation, I believe, made him sick. They denied him treatment and denied that he had, that had done anything wrong. And I didn't really like the redemption, again, of that character, but I don't want to relitigate all that. But Miles is dealing with that, too, along with the death of his father, Jefferson Davis, at the beginning of this game. In fact, you find, in Marvel Spider-Man 2, you find a trophy that you and Finn won at a science fair. It's a trophy, a PlayStation trophy, and like a trophy in the game, you find it on top of a cathedral. But also, Harry Osborn's introduced kind of at the end of the original Spider-Man in 2018. They allude to him being experimented on by the symbiote because he has a genetic disease that his mother had, and she actually passed away when he and Peter were friends in high school, and Peter was there when Norman Osborn came through and said, your mother died. And so Harry has the same disease in the second game, and with the symbiote being attached to Harry Osborn, it wants to heal the world. He believes everybody is sick. Obviously, the symbiote is malevolent and wants to heal the world by turning everybody into a symbiote, which is nuts. But all these characters, most of the main characters of the game are dealing with death in some way. Norman Osborn, of course, seeing his wife die of this genetic disease and knowing that his son has it, would go to great lengths to protect his son. So he's doing all these crazy experiments on his son with the symbiote, even though he's working with Dr. Connors, who we know as the Lizard Man, or Mr. It's not Mr. Lizard, it's a Lizard Man. I don't know why I can't remember that. Anyway, all this kind of stuff is pretty, dealt with so well in the game. Everybody's kind of dealing with the shock of stuff of, what would you be thinking or feeling when, in fact, Miles' big arc, one of the arcs he has in the game, of not only being Spider-Man, but being, Lee breaks out of the raft and he has the chance to kill Lee, almost does, but they actually have a small arc in the game where they have to fight each other. Miles saves him, and then him and Lee kind of go into this mental battle because the symbiote's like infecting Peter's, because obviously at this point, if you know anything about Spider-Man, the symbiote suit attaches to Peter, makes him pretty aggressive. Lee has the ability to see men's hearts, hence I think Mr. Negative goes inside Peter's heart with Miles, and they kind of like walk around. And I do like, for Spider-Man's whole thing for a long time has obviously been, with great power comes great responsibility. Peter Parker, anyway. And I think that breeds to a, with great power comes great responsibility. But this brings you to a place where you always feel, at least what I've seen of Peter in the game, is he always feels inadequate. So everything, the pressure is always on him. I have the responsibility for the city, even though, I just want to point this out there, and I know it's a video game, they can't do it, but the Avengers Tower is in New York, and you can see it. So they haven't really introduced any cross things where Peter has called the Avengers or talked to the Avengers, but, there's a difference between being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and, the symbiotes attacking the city. Somebody pointed that, I think, kind of funny. I watched their stuff. I think it was Greg Miller mentioned, the Avengers wouldn't help if the symbiotes attacked the city. They would, but obviously it's a game. You can't bring in a relicense and stuff like that. But this kind of breeds Peter's thing with Mr. Lee and Miles when they go in Peter's head about him feeling inadequate. And he couldn't save Aunt May when they killed Aunt May at the end of 2018 Spider-Man. And how these feelings of inadequacy, actually, when the symbiote bonds to him, it just amplifies those feelings. And it's anger, but I think these feelings of inadequacy kind of grow inside him. And I think he says at one point when he's angry being the symbiote that, I could be the best Spider-Man. Or I think he's fighting with Miles, and he said, I could be the only Spider-Man. I could be the best Spider-Man. And it kind of dawned on me after a while, I was thinking about doing this episode, that that's a pretty crazy message to think that you have to do it. I had a big breakthrough in therapy, and I've said it before, but I'll just say it again. My therapist said to me, I was telling him about work, and I was stressed out, and he said, Joe, let me ask you a question. Why do you expect perfection out of yourself, but you allow other people to make mistakes? Other people are going to make mistakes. They're going to, you're going to be shortchanged, but you expect yourself to be infallible. And I was like, well, I don't know, Doc. I don't know how much time we have in these sessions and how many more years I'm going to be sitting in this office. But I think of that a lot with this Spider-Man game, that I think Peter feels that he has to be the perfect Spider-Man. I read somewhere that there was this philosophy of Spider-Man, or maybe I'm inferring this from reading the comics and just reading interviews with people, that if Spider-Man was doing really well, Peter Parker had to be doing terribly. Or if Peter Parker was doing terribly, Spider-Man had to be doing really well. And so that's why you see Peter Parker lose his job in the beginning of Spider-Man 20, the one that just came out, Marvel Spider-Man 2. He loses his job within the first 30 minutes of the game. And I just thought to myself, why does he keep trying to get a 9 to 5? I told my wife, the best thing for Peter, I mean, the gig economy is terrible, and we've seen through the layoffs that I've talked about in gaming through the years that, like, getting any kind of 9 to 5 in any creative endeavor sucks because you could be fired at any time because of corporate overlords. But, man, you'd think Peter would be like, I just got to freelance and, like, submit photos, which he kind of does in the game. He submits photos and gets paid for to Robbie. But anyway, to me, that's really the most powerful thing is, like, this feeling of inadequacy, this inadequacy that Peter has. Miles just says to, Martin Lee, you just have to try to be better. We have to be better. So he kind of understands that, he is going through his own struggles. He's trying to do the thing where he juggles a million things at a time. He blatantly asks his mother, Rio, he's like, do you need me to thwip around the city and start asking questions? Or do you need me to just, and I think she says, just listen to me for a second. And is talking about something that happened in the community. I think Miles kind of, even though he's dealing with the grief of his father, what his father taught him about not being perfect. And in fact, his brother Aaron, who we found out to be the Prowler in Miles Morales 2020, is that, his brother is even trying, even his brother Aaron, like there's like a postscript in one of the scenes that Aaron's moved into the same building as them so family can be around. But he says it all the time, he's not doing crime anymore. And that I think he's working for the Department of Transportation, running a subway, being a subway conductor, basically. And I think that idea, it's almost like Peter never learned that lesson, that Miles, I think, is in kind of a better place than Peter, because Miles understands, like, he does have, from the very beginning, Miles has his friend Genki who, it's his guy in the chair is the joke of, like, online, talking to him in a headset, looking stuff up, hacking things. Later, Genki controls a flying drone, so they can, like, work together. And so he has a support system. He's told more people out of the jump than Peter, I think, did that he was Spider-Man, even though many people at the end of the original Spider-Man 2018 admitted to Peter that they knew that he was Spider-Man. And so I think, I'm just thinking about I wrote notes this morning and I reflected on the game before I did the episode. And I do think, strangely enough, I think Miles is in a better place, like, emotionally than Peter is. Not to say he doesn't miss his father or anything, but yeah. And so, I like the journey that Peter goes on. There's kind of a thing towards the end where they kind of allude to Peter retiring. I don't know if I really like that. I like the idea of there being, like, a grizzled old man, Peter. I mean, he's only 29 or 30. And I mean, there was a few scenes before that when him and Miles were talking. It was like right after a cutscene. Well, after a big fight scene, you have like a cutscene. And I think Miles says something about, it's a big enough city for both of us, In fact, I think it is kind of cool that there's two kind of friendly neighborhood Spider-Men to patrol the city. The best thing I did at the end of the game, and I told my wife this, that it was kind of weird because what I did is I just swung around the city to get the last couple trophies. I had the ones where you have to beat people up using certain abilities, like Miles' abilities, or like the Spider-Man arm, like mechanical arm abilities, or the Venom abilities. So I was kind of going around, thwipping around, beating guys up using different things, ticking that off. Luckily, in PlayStation, they keep track of it now, so I knew how many I had to get. And that was like the most I felt like a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man of, like, well, that arms deal isn't going to go well, or, hey, that, people are trapped in that bus. Those symbiotes are still out. They're still trapped there. I got to figure that out and get those people out. That kind of stuff I thought was really moving. But part of me was like, would Peter really retire? It'd be like, no, I still need to do this, even if it's a big threat. 2 is always better than 1. And I don't think one of them could have, even, again, spoilers, with Peter getting the anti-Venom suit, which I thought was really cool. I didn't know that much about it in the comics, but I'm sure they pulled from it or whatever. The idea of him saying, I can't do this alone, and, like, trusting Miles enough. In fact, at the end, something else that kind of funny pointed out that I didn't remember was that the idea that at the end before they started, Peter looked at Miles and said, "What's the play, coach?" Meaning, what do we do? I don't know what to do next. And I thought it was so good and not even like passing the baton or like, I'm out. It was more like, what would you do? There's two of us now. In a way, we have similar abilities. Miles has more electrical abilities. He can also stealth. But like, Peter has the arms. Anyway, it's like instead of it looking like a student thing, like it has been, like the tutoring and all that. Like Peter always uses the cover of "I got a tutor," but it's Miles. They're web slinging around the city. It's really like now we're colleagues, and I like that. And I don't really want Peter to retire. I don't think he will. Obviously, there's going to be a third game, and they've alluded to certain things where there's going to be villains and things like that are going to pop up. That was it was cool, but again, I don't want Peter to retire. And there was only one line in the whole. I was talking about lines of dialogue that like upset me with grief. And there's one thing to this day, even after writing all my notes and thinking of the episode and all that kind of stuff, that really bugged me, and that's at the end. Again, total spoilers, so turn away if you haven't played the game. But there's a scene at the end when it looks like Harry Osborn is basically on life support, just like his mother. Norman tells his scientist to get the G serum ready, which is basically, alluding to Green Goblin. And then he goes to Dr. Octavius in the raft and talks to him. And the last thing that Harry saw with Spiderman all beaten up was near his son, who was hurt after the symbiote had ravaged Harry's body, and they had a big boss fight. And so, rightfully so, Norman, the father, connects the Spider-Man to hurting his son. That makes sense. And so he goes to Doc Ock and says, "You know who the Spider-Men are, don't you? You know who both of them are. They hurt my son." And strangely enough, this is the line that bothers me. Doc Ock turns around and says, "Good, Norman. Everybody should experience loss, even you." But the thing is, Norman's wife died of a genetic disease, and his son was on his deathbed and supposedly going through treatment. The public story was Harry was going through treatment in Europe the whole time so he wouldn't succumb to his illness. So Norman's already experienced loss and death and grief. So I'd be like, and I think Norman actually kind of ignores the comment. But that was the only line that I was like, man, Doc Ock would know that. Because I think didn't Doc Ock have a relative that died? I don't remember from the first game. But like, yeah, a good one. That was the only line that like stuck in my head that didn't really fit with the rest of the narrative. But one line for a game this amazing. I think I played it for more hours than everybody else because I didn't realize till the end, you had to beat certain people with certain abilities, which I used, but I didn't use them to like, I have to, I wasn't planning to get the trophy while I was playing the game. I kind of did it clean up afterwards. So I think I played it for 30 hours, 32 hours, something like that. I know a lot of people can do it in like 25, but I just swung around the city for the last several hours. And it says defeat enemies using certain abilities. So I'd punch them or hit them with the mechanical arms and they would get back up. And it's like, oh, now all those are uncool. Anyway, that's a digression for the Platinum Trophy. But I think the game does a good job of characterizing, Miles being in a better emotional place, Peter being able to at least look at maybe his peer now and ask for help, which is great. And I think that, I don't know how Norman's going to feel about the whole thing. It seemed like before Harry went into his coma, after he was sick from the symbiote and Peter and Miles got it off him, that he's in like medical coma probably. But hopefully when he wakes up, he doesn't blame Peter and Miles, and he doesn't, I don't know, maybe the G serum is not going to have a control over that. But I guess we'll see. But that's kind of my take on Spider-Man 2. Again, this is a big spoiler thing. So if you like what you see here and everything, please subscribe to the channel, stuff like that. I think that's it, and I will talk to everybody next week. Bye.